The sun burned mercilessly across the Arizona territory as Maria Running Wolf pressed herself against the rocky outcrop, her breathing shallow and controlled. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on her shoulder where the cavalry bullet had found its mark 3 days ago. Her dark eyes scanned the valley below where smoke still rose from what had once been her village. She was the last one left. The others had either fled deeper into the mountains or lay silent forever among the burning wickiups. The soldiers had come at dawn, just as the elder women were preparing the morning meal and children were beginning to stir. There had been no warning, no chance to gather their few precious belongings or say goodbye to the sacred places their people had called home for generations. Maria clutched her father's medicine bag tighter against her chest. Chief Running Wolf had been a respected leader who had tried desperately to negotiate peace with the white settlers. His efforts had meant nothing when the new territorial governor decided that all Apache needed to be driven from their ancestral lands. Now her father's voice was silenced forever. And she carried the weight of being perhaps the only surviving member of her band. The sound of approaching horses made her freeze. Through a gap in the rocks, she could see 2 riders making their way up the narrow trail. Her hand moved instinctively to the knife at her belt, though she knew that in her weakened state, she would be no match for armed men. The fever from her infected wound was making her thoughts cloudy, and her water supply had run out yesterday. As the riders drew closer, she could make out more details. The first man was clearly a cavalry officer, his blue uniform dusty from travel and his hand resting casually on his rifle. But it was the second rider who caught her attention. He wore simple rancher's clothes, a weathered hat pulled low over his face, and rode with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in this harsh land. The officer was speaking loudly, his voice carrying on the thin mountain air. "I'm telling you, McKenna, there's got to be more of them hiding up here. The colonel wants this whole area cleared before the railroad survey team arrives next month." The rancher, McKenna, pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years working under the desert sun. His movements were deliberate and careful as he examined the ground around them. "These tracks are old, Lieutenant. Whoever was here is long gone by now." Maria watched as McKenna knelt down and studied the faint impressions in the sandy soil. His examination was thorough and respectful, not like the careless searching of someone looking for an enemy to destroy. There was something in his manner that reminded her of her father's way of reading the land, understanding its stories, and respecting its secrets. The lieutenant dismounted as well, his boots hitting the ground with unnecessary force. "The orders are clear. Any Apache found in this territory are to be taken to the reservation immediately, dead or alive, McKenna. The governor doesn't want any more raids on the settlements." "There haven't been any raids from this area in over 2 years, McKenna replied quietly, still studying the ground. "These people were trying to live peacefully." "Peaceful?" The lieutenant's voice rose with indignation. "These savages killed 3 families just last winter. Women and children, McKenna. Don't tell me about peaceful." Maria's jaw clenched at the officer's words. Those raids had been carried out by a different band, desperate people, driven to violence by starvation and broken promises. Her father had spoken against such actions, believing that violence would only bring more suffering to their people. He had been right, but his wisdom had cost him everything. McKenna stood up slowly, his weathered face showing no emotion as he faced the younger officer. "That was Geronimo's band, Lieutenant. These tracks belong to Running Wolf's people. There's a difference, though I don't expect you to understand it." "Apache is Apache," the lieutenant snapped. "The only good Indian is a dead Indian, as far as I'm concerned." The rancher's eyes hardened at those words, though his voice remained steady. "Is that so? Well, you might want to remember that this is my land you're standing on. Lieutenant, I decide who stays and who goes." Maria felt a flicker of hope at the tension between the 2 men. Perhaps there was more to this rancher than she had first thought. She had heard stories from trading posts about white settlers who treated the Apache with respect, but she had begun to believe such men were as rare as water in the deepest desert. The lieutenant's face flushed red with anger. "Your land might be, but this is still United States territory, and I have my orders." If you're harboring any of these hostiles— I'm not harboring anyone, McKenna interrupted, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. But I'm also not going to stand by and watch innocent people be slaughtered because some politician in Washington wants to make a name for himself. As the two men argued, Maria felt her strength beginning to fail. The fever was getting worse, and the edges of her vision were starting to blur. She tried to shift her position to get more comfortable, but a loose stone skittered down the rocky slope, the small sound echoing in the mountain silence. Both men turned toward the sound immediately, their hands moving to their weapons. The lieutenant's face lit up with vicious satisfaction. Well, well. Looks like we found ourselves an Apache after all. McKenna's hand moved more slowly, his eyes scanning the rocky outcrop with a careful, measuring gaze. Come on down, he called out, his voice neither threatening nor particularly welcoming. No sense in playing hide-and-seek all day. Maria knew she had no choice. Her strength was nearly gone, and she could not outrun mounted men, even if she had been healthy. Taking a deep breath, she stood up slowly, keeping her hands visible but ready to reach for her knife if necessary. The sight of her seemed to surprise both men, though for different reasons. The lieutenant had clearly expected to find a warrior, not a young woman barely able to stand. McKenna's expression was unreadable, but his hand had moved away from his weapon entirely. Well, I'll be damned, the lieutenant muttered. A squaw. Probably knows where the rest of them are hiding. He took a step forward, his rifle raised. Come down here, girl. We've got some questions for you. Maria's chin lifted with pride, despite her weakness. She understood English well enough, having learned it from traders who had visited her village in more peaceful times, but she would not give this man the satisfaction of knowing that. Instead, she began to make her way carefully down the rocky slope, her movements slow and deliberate to avoid triggering any sudden actions from the nervous officer. As she descended, McKenna watched her with eyes that seemed to take in everything: her obvious injury, the careful way she moved to avoid showing weakness, the proud set of her shoulders despite her desperate circumstances. When she reached the bottom of the slope, she stood before them with as much dignity as she could manage, though the world was beginning to spin around her. She's hurt, McKenna observed quietly, noting the blood on her shoulder and the pallor of her skin beneath the desert tan. The lieutenant seemed less concerned with her condition than with what information she might provide. Where are the others? End quote. Where are the others? He demanded, stepping closer with his rifle still raised. How many more of you are hiding up there? Maria met his gaze steadily, saying nothing. Even if she could have told him what he wanted to know, she would not betray her people's memory with words spoken to their killer. McKenna stepped between them, his movement casual but effective. She's barely standing, Lieutenant. Whatever information you think she has, she's not going to be telling you anything in this condition. We'll see about that, the officer replied grimly. I've got orders to bring back any hostiles we find. If she won't talk here, she can talk at the fort. The thought of being dragged to the military fort filled Maria with cold dread. She had heard the stories of what happened to Apache prisoners there. The lucky ones died quickly. The others faced a slower, more humiliating end in the reservation camps, where disease and despair claimed more lives than bullets ever had. She swayed on her feet, the fever and exhaustion finally overwhelming her body's ability to keep fighting. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was McKenna's weathered face, looking down at her with what might have been concern, though she could not be sure if it was real or simply the fever's final gift of false hope. Maria woke to the sound of voices speaking in low tones, and the unfamiliar sensation of lying on something soft. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light that filtered through what appeared to be canvas walls. She was inside a tent, lying on a bedroll with a clean blanket covering her. The sharp smell of antiseptic, mixed with wood smoke, told her that someone had tended to her wound. Panic shot through her as she remembered the lieutenant and his threats. She tried to sit up quickly, but dizziness forced her back down. Her shoulder had been properly bandaged, and though it still ached, the burning fever seemed to have broken. Someone had also given her water, as evidenced by the half-empty canteen beside her bedroll. Easy there, came a familiar voice from outside the tent. You've been unconscious for almost 2 days. Moving too fast isn't going to do you any favors. The tent flap opened, and McKenna ducked inside, carrying a tin plate with what smelled like stew. He moved with the same careful deliberation she had noticed before, setting the plate down within reach but not close enough to make her feel trapped. "Where is the soldier?" Maria asked in English, her voice hoarse from fever. She watched McKenna's face carefully for any sign of deception or threat. He showed no surprise at her ability to speak English. "Lieutenant Morrison rode back to the fort yesterday. Had to report that this area was clear of hostiles." The way he said the last word made it clear what he thought of the military's terminology. Maria studied his weathered face, trying to understand his motives. "Why did you not give me to him? There will be trouble for you if they discover you helped me." McKenna settled back on his heels, keeping his distance but maintaining eye contact. "There might be. But turning over a wounded woman to Morrison didn't sit right with me. That boy's got more bloodlust than sense, and I've seen what happens to Apache prisoners at the fort. You know what they do to my people?" Maria's voice carried both surprise and wariness. Most white settlers either didn't know or didn't care about the treatment of Apache prisoners. "I know enough," McKenna replied grimly. "I've lived in this territory for 15 years. I've seen the raids and the reprisals, the broken treaties, and the families destroyed on both sides. I've also seen Apache, who wanted nothing more than to live in peace, like your father." Maria felt a jolt of surprise. "You knew my father?" "Chief Running Wolf came to my ranch 3 years ago during the drought. His people were starving, and he asked if they could camp by my water source in exchange for work." McKenna's voice carried a note of respect. "He was an honorable man. He kept his word, and his people helped me through a hard winter. When spring came, they moved on without taking so much as an extra horse." The memory brought tears to Maria's eyes, though she fought to keep them from falling. Her father had never mentioned this encounter, but it sounded exactly like something he would have done. He had always believed that survival meant adaptation, working with others when possible, rather than always fighting. "He spoke of a white man who showed respect for Apache ways," she said quietly. "He said there were few such men, but they gave him hope for peace." McKenna nodded slowly. "Your father was trying to build bridges when most folks on both sides just wanted to burn them down. I respected that, even when it wasn't the popular thing to do." Maria attempted to sit up again, this time moving more slowly. McKenna made no move to help or hinder her, letting her maintain her dignity while she struggled to a sitting position. The stew smelled wonderful, reminding her that she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. "Why are you helping me?" she asked bluntly. "If you are caught, they will call you a traitor to your own people." McKenna was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "Maybe I am, by some folks' reckoning. But I figure there's been enough killing. Your people are fighting for survival. My people are fighting for expansion. Neither side seems willing to admit that maybe there's enough land for everyone if we could just stop shooting each other long enough to work something out." Maria took a careful spoonful of the stew. It was simple fare, but well prepared and seasoned. As she ate, she studied McKenna more carefully. He was probably in his 40s, with the kind of patient strength that came from years of surviving in harsh country. His hands were scarred from ranch work, and his clothes were practical rather than fashionable. Everything about him suggested a man who understood the value of hard work and honest dealing. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. In her experience, white men always wanted something, even when they appeared to be helping. "Nothing," McKenna replied simply. "Well, that's not entirely true. I want you to get well enough to make your own choices about what comes next. But that's going to take some time, and it's going to require you to trust me, at least a little." Maria set down the spoon and met his gaze directly. "Trust is earned, not given. My father trusted white man's promises before. It cost him his life and the lives of his people." "Fair enough," McKenna acknowledged. "I can't undo what others have done, and I won't insult you by pretending that my good intentions make up for their betrayals. But right now, you're injured and alone in country that's crawling with soldiers who shoot first and ask questions later. Like it or not, you need help." The blunt honesty of his words struck Maria more than any elaborate promises might have. He was not trying to convince her that he was different from other white men, only that their current circumstances required cooperation regardless of their respective histories. "What do you propose?" she asked carefully. McKenna leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "My ranch is about 2 days' ride from here. It's isolated enough that we're not likely to get surprise visits from the cavalry. You can recover there while we figure out what your options are. There are rumors of Apache bands gathering somewhere south of the border, beyond the reach of the U.S. military. If that's what you want, I can help you get that far once you're strong enough to travel." Maria considered his offer. She had few alternatives, and none of them were particularly appealing. Attempting to cross the desert alone in her current condition would be suicide. Surrendering to the military meant certain death, if not immediately then slowly in the reservation camps. And the possibility of finding other Apache survivors was worth almost any risk. "And if I choose to stay and fight?" she asked, watching his reaction carefully. McKenna's expression didn't change. "That's your choice to make. I won't try to stop you, though I'd point out that one person against the entire U.S. Army isn't much of a fight. Sometimes one person is all that remains to carry the memory of a people," Maria replied with quiet dignity. "True enough," McKenna agreed. "But memory can be carried in other ways than dying with a rifle in your hands. Your father understood that. He was trying to preserve Apache culture by finding ways for it to coexist with the changing world." Maria finished the stew in silence, considering his words. Her father had indeed spoken often about adaptation and survival, about the need to be like water that finds a way around obstacles, rather than crashing against them and being destroyed. "You speak of my father with respect," she said finally. "But you are still a white man, taking land that once belonged to my people. How do you justify that to yourself?" McKenna met her challenging gaze without flinching. "I don't, entirely. I bought my land legally according to territorial law. But I know that doesn't mean much to people whose families lived there for generations. I try to be a good neighbor to whoever's left, Apache or otherwise. It's not perfect justice, but it's the best I can do with the circumstances I was born into." His honesty was unsettling. Maria had expected either righteous justification or guilty defensiveness. Instead, she found a man who seemed to understand the moral complexity of his situation, without using that understanding as an excuse for inaction. "If I come to your ranch," she said slowly, "what would be expected of me?" "Nothing you're not willing to give," McKenna replied. "You'd be a guest, not a prisoner or a servant. Though I'll admit the company would be welcome. It gets pretty quiet out there with just me and the horses." Maria studied his face for any sign of the kind of expectations that often lurked behind white men's offers of help to Apache women. She found none, though her experience had taught her that such things were often well hidden. "You live alone?" she asked. "My wife died of fever 4 years ago. No children." McKenna's voice carried old pain, carefully controlled. "The isolation was her choice as much as mine. She wanted to be somewhere we could build something together, away from the judgment of folks who thought our marriage was a mistake." "Why did they think it was a mistake?" McKenna was quiet for a moment, then said simply, "Because she was Apache." Maria felt her breath catch in surprise. This revelation changed everything about how she had been interpreting their conversation. A white man who had married an Apache woman would indeed understand things that others could not. "What was her name?" Maria asked softly. "Elena." "Elena, Gentle Rain McKenna." His voice carried love and loss in equal measure. "She was Running Wolf's niece, your cousin." The world seemed to shift around Maria as this information sank in. Elena had been her father's favorite niece, a young woman known for her wisdom and her gift for seeing beyond the immediate troubles to longer-term solutions. She had disappeared during a trading expedition 5 years ago, and her family had assumed she had been captured or killed. "Elena chose to marry you?" Maria asked, needing to understand. "She chose love over fear," McKenna replied simply. "It wasn't easy for either of us. Her people thought she was betraying her heritage, and mine thought I was betraying my race. But Elena believed that individual choices could change the world, one relationship at a time." Maria closed her eyes, overwhelmed by this unexpected connection to her lost family. When she opened them again, she found McKenna watching her, with patient understanding. "She would want me to help you," she said finally. "Maybe. But what Elena would want matters less than what you need. The choice is yours, Maria Running Wolf. I'm just offering you the time and space to make it freely." So, Maria looked around the simple tent, at this white man who spoke her cousin's name with reverence, at the care he had taken to heal her wounds and respect her dignity. The future was uncertain and dangerous. But for the first time since the attack on her village, she felt something besides despair. "Have mercy, rancher," she said quietly, using words that acknowledged both her vulnerability and her strength. "I will follow your guidance until I am strong enough to choose my own path." McKenna nodded solemnly, understanding that her words represented not submission but a strategic alliance between equals. "Then we'd better get you ready to travel. The longer we stay here, the more likely we are to have unwanted visitors." The journey to McKenna's ranch took 3 days instead of the planned 2. Maria's strength returned slowly, and McKenna seemed content to travel at whatever pace she could manage without complaint. They rode during the cooler hours of early morning and evening, resting during the heat of the day, in whatever shade they could find. On the second day, as they sheltered beneath a rock overhang during the scorching afternoon, Maria found herself studying the man who had become her unlikely protector. He moved with the quiet efficiency of someone long accustomed to solitude, but she noticed the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert for danger that might threaten her safety as well as his own. "Tell me about Elena," she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had developed between them. McKenna looked up from the bridle he was repairing, his hands stilling on the worn leather. "What would you like to know? How did you meet?" "My father never spoke of her leaving the village willingly." McKenna set down the bridle and leaned back against the rock wall. "It was during the spring trading season 4 years ago. She came to town with a group from your village, looking to trade pottery and blankets for supplies. Some cowboys had been drinking and decided to have some fun with the Apache women." Maria's jaw tightened. She had heard too many stories that started this way, and few of them ended well. "Elena wasn't having any of it," McKenna continued, a slight smile crossing his weathered features. "She broke one man's nose with a pottery bowl and had her knife out before the others could react. Probably would have carved up 2 more of them if I hadn't stepped in." "You fought your own people for her." "I fought drunk bullies for someone who didn't deserve their attention," McKenna corrected gently. "The fact that she was Apache mattered less to me than the fact that she was being attacked for no good reason." Maria could picture the scene easily. Elena had always been fierce when cornered, despite her reputation for wisdom and diplomacy. And then, she stayed to tend my injuries after the fight. Said anyone foolish enough to get stabbed defending a stranger's honor deserved proper medical attention. McKenna's smile grew wider at the memory. She had a way of making insults sound like compliments. "That sounds like Elena," Maria agreed softly. "She never let anyone feel too proud of themselves, even when they deserved it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in memories of a woman who had bridged 2 worlds with courage and love. Finally, Maria spoke again. "My father searched for her when the trading party returned without her. They said she had simply disappeared during the night. She left a message with the tribal elder, explaining that she was choosing a different path, but she knew that if she returned to say goodbye in person, your father would try to stop her or insist on coming with her to ensure her safety." Maria nodded slowly. It was exactly the kind of decision Elena would have made. Protecting her family from having to choose between supporting her choice and maintaining their position within the tribe. Did she regret it, leaving her people? McKenna considered the question carefully. She missed them terribly. Especially your father and you. But she never regretted choosing love over fear. She said that someone had to be the first to cross the bridge, even if it meant walking alone for a while. "She wasn't alone," Maria observed. "She had you, yes. But being married to me meant being cut off from almost everyone else she had ever known. It wasn't an easy life, even though we were happy together." Maria understood the sacrifice Elena had made more clearly now. To marry outside the tribe meant exile from her people. while marrying an Apache meant rejection by most white society as well. Elena had chosen to create her own community of two, gambling everything on the possibility that love could overcome the hatred that surrounded them. On the third morning, they crested a low hill, and Maria got her first view of McKenna's ranch. It was smaller than she had expected, consisting of a modest adobe house, a barn, and several corrals set in a valley with a creek running through it. The land was good for cattle, with plenty of grass and water, but remote enough to offer privacy from unwanted visitors. As they rode down into the valley, Maria noticed signs of Elena's influence everywhere. The house was surrounded by a vegetable garden laid out in the traditional Apache pattern, with plants that would grow well in the desert climate. Wind chimes made from pottery shards hung from the porch eaves, creating soft music when the breeze stirred them. She wanted to prove that Apache farming techniques could improve the land rather than just use it, McKenna explained, following Maria's gaze. Said too many white farmers fought the desert instead of working with it. Inside the house, Elena's presence was even stronger. The rooms were furnished simply but comfortably, with Apache blankets and pottery mixed seamlessly with practical frontier furniture. Everything spoke of a woman who had created a home that honored both her heritage and her new life. That evening, as Maria sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, McKenna joined her with 2 cups of coffee. The silence between them had become easy and natural, no longer charged with suspicion and wariness. "I've been thinking about what comes next," Maria said finally. McKenna settled into the chair beside her, waiting for her to continue in her own time. "There are Apache gathering in the Sierra Madre Mountains, beyond the reach of American soldiers. I could join them. Continue the fight from there." "You could," McKenna agreed neutrally. "Or, I could try to reach the reservation, see if any of my father's people survived and are willing to endure that life. That's another option." Maria turned to look at him directly. "What would Elena do?" McKenna was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. Elena would find a third choice. She didn't believe in accepting other people's definitions of what was possible. And what third choice would that be? "I don't know," McKenna admitted. "That would depend on what you wanted to accomplish with your life, and what you were willing to sacrifice to get it." Maria stared out at the peaceful valley, thinking about her father's dreams of coexistence and Elena's courage in pursuing love across cultural boundaries. Both had paid a heavy price for their choices, but both had also created something beautiful in the process. "My father wanted peace between our peoples," she said slowly. Elena proved that such peace was possible, at least on a small scale. Maybe there's a way to build on what they started. "What are you thinking?" Maria stood up and walked to the porch railing, her mind working through possibilities. Apache children in the reservation schools are forgetting their heritage, their language, their connection to the land. White children grow up believing that Apache are savage enemies to be feared and destroyed. Both groups suffer from this ignorance. McKenna began to see where her thoughts were leading. "You're thinking about education." 18. A mater. "I'm thinking about truth," Maria corrected. "Elena taught you Apache farming methods, and they improved your land. My father learned English and used it to negotiate better terms for his people. What if there was a place where both groups could learn from each other?" "That's a dangerous idea," McKenna warned. "Both sides have plenty of folks who profit from keeping the hatred alive." "All the best ideas are dangerous," Maria replied with a smile that reminded McKenna powerfully of Elena. "But someone has to be the first to cross the bridge." Over the following weeks, as Maria's strength fully returned, they refined the idea together. The ranch was isolated enough to avoid unwanted attention, but accessible to both Apache families fleeing north and white settlers heading west. They could offer practical education in both directions, teaching Apache children English and arithmetic, while showing white children how to live sustainably in the desert. It would require careful planning and absolute discretion. They would need to establish contact with Apache groups willing to trust a partially white partnership, and find white families open-minded enough to consider Apache knowledge valuable. The dangers were real and significant, but so was the potential for creating real understanding between two cultures that had been taught to see each other only as enemies. Maria stood in Elena's garden one evening, tending the plants her cousin had started, and thinking about the future they were planning together. It was not the future she would have chosen if her village had survived. But it was a future that honored her father's memory and Elena's sacrifice, while giving her own life meaning and purpose. McKenna joined her as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Maria considered the question seriously. She would always mourn her family and her people, would always carry the pain of their loss and the anger at their treatment, but she had also found something she had not expected. A way to turn that pain into something constructive, something that might prevent other children from suffering as she had suffered. "Elena was right," she said finally. "Someone has to be the first to cross the bridge. I cannot bring back the dead, but I can try to build a world where fewer people die from hatred and ignorance." McKenna nodded slowly, understanding that she had found her own path forward, one that was neither submission nor rebellion but something entirely new. Together, they would create a small island of understanding in a sea of conflict, knowing that it might fail but believing that the attempt itself was worthwhile. As they walked back toward the house, Maria felt a sense of peace she had not experienced since childhood. She had lost everything that defined her old life, but in Elena's garden and McKenna's quiet strength, she had found the possibility of creating something entirely new. It would not be easy, and there would be setbacks and dangers ahead. But for the first time since the attack on her village, she could see a future that offered hope rather than just survival. The wind chimes sang softly in the evening breeze, carrying Elena's spirit and blessing into the gathering darkness, where two cultures might yet learn to meet in peace rather than violence.